Hello again and welcome to our next video. Now, the last time we'd finished off with the Episcopal Church system being forced on the Scots by King James VI of Scotland, the first of England. Now, the Scottish Church wanted to be Presbyterian. The Episcopal system, you'll remember, is the one where the church is governed by bishops with the monarch as the head. Presbyterianism is the form of church government where Christ is the head of the church. Sadly, even more things would be introduced into the Scottish Church, which would lead the people of Scotland to believe that the church here was moving back to the Roman Catholic Church. In 1618, something known as the 5 Articles of Perth were introduced. Now, these were 5 Roman Catholic and Episcopal worship practices that were forced on the Scottish Church. And these included things like kneeling for communion, confirmation by bishops, and observance of holy days like Christmas, Easter, and others. Now, these were the things that men like John Knox and Andrew Melville had been against, as well, they're not in the Bible, they were unbiblical. So these 5 Articles of Perth were not well received by the Scottish ministers. However, if you spoke out against them, you would be removed and even imprisoned because of it. But one man who did speak out against these 5 Articles of Perth was a man called Alexander Henderson. And it's important to have a little look at Alexander Henderson because, as we're going to see, he's going to become one of the leading figures in Scotland's Second Reformation. And this Second Reformation is rapidly approaching. Now, surprisingly, Alexander Henderson had been an Episcopal minister and had been sent to the town of Lookers, the village of Lookers, near St Andrews. And as he went there, the people were in that area were Presbyterian, so they didn't want him. And as he was approaching, they locked the church doors so that he couldn't get in. However, he did manage to find an open window in the church and climbed in through that open window. But he wasn't welcomed by the locals. A short time after his arrival, he heard of a Presbyterian minister by the name of Robert Bruce, who was preaching nearby. Henderson went and listened to Bruce preaching, and the Reverend Bruce was preaching his sermon from a part of the Bible in John's Gospel, the first part of chapter 10. And in this part, Jesus is speaking of the church and the church leaders, and he's saying that those who are the true shepherds of the sheep enter the sheepfold through the door, but those that are seeking to harm the church, they'll climb in some other way, and he's saying that they're like thieves and robbers. Now, Alexander Henderson remembers that when he went to Lookers, he didn't go in through the front door. He actually climbed in through the window. And this had a huge impact on him and on his life. And as we're going to see later on, he would become Presbyterian, and not just become Presbyterian, but he would become one of the leading Presbyterians in Scotland. But we'll go back to just after the 5 Articles of Perth. So 1618, the 5 Articles of Perth. 1625, King James dies and his son Charles I becomes king. Like his father, Charles I believes in the divine right of kings. That belief that the monarch has absolute rule over all things, even the church. Now, this belief, pretty early on in his reign, brings him into conflict with the English Parliament. And in 1629, he dissolves the Parliament and says he doesn't need them and rules alone. In 1633, a man called William Laud was made Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the top position in the Episcopal Church. Charles gives him the task of bringing the Scottish Church into line with the English Church and to take action against anybody that doesn't accept the Episcopal Church system in Scotland. So Laud goes ahead with this. And in 1636, Laud introduces the Book of Canons. Now, this is a book of church laws which is based on those 5 Articles of Perth. it ignores presbyteries in sessions and general assemblies. It sets out that you will be excommunicated, which is the highest discipline in the church, as punishment for if you say that the king doesn't have complete control over everything in the church. And anybody that makes rules without the king's permission in the church, they'll be excommunicated as well. But it also says that ministers are no longer just able to stand up and pray from their heart. What they have to do is they're going to have to read from this Book of Common Prayer and pray from that. And that Book of Common Prayer is going to be introduced and published the next year. And that Book of Common Prayer is going to be the last straw for the Protestant Presbyterian people of Scotland. They had watched, as time went past, that almost all that had been achieved by the Reformation in 1560 was slowly being lost, and the church in Scotland is moving back to the Church of Rome. And so, the following year, 23rd of July 1637, Dean Hannay stands up in St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh and reads from this new prayer book. No sooner had he begun to read when a market trader woman called Jenny Geddes stands up, accuses him of saying the Roman Catholic Mass in her ear, picks up her stool and throws it at the pulpit. Jenny Geddes' stool is the first of many, and inside St Giles Cathedral there's a riot. Dean Hannay is removed from the pulpit and put out the church. Because of this riot and objections to the Book of Canon and the 5 Articles of Perth, the Presbyterians in Scotland were facing real accusations of treason by King Charles. So they decide that they need to get some way of uniting together and coming together as one so that they can stand against these attacks on their faith. They agreed to renew the 1581 King's Confession, that first national covenant, but they were going to add 2 extra sections. So this renewed covenant had 3 sections in it. The first section was the 1581 national covenant, word for word. That was the first section. There was then a legal section which listed over 60 acts of Parliament, which many were against Roman Catholicism and supported the Presbyterian cause. And there was also a practical section, how this applies to the current situation they were in. Now, the legal section was written by a lawyer named Archibald Johnson of Warriston, and this practical section was written by Alexander Henderson. Now, 28th of February 1638, the following year, up to 60,000 people flooded into Edinburgh when it was going to be first read out in Greyfriars. Alexander Henderson opened with prayer. The Earl of Loudon, he defended their being there, and Archibald Johnson of Warriston, the lawyer, he read the National Covenant aloud, this new National Covenant. There was a period of silence, and then people were invited to come forward and sign the Covenant. First it was signed by the nobles, and then later on it would be signed by the ministers, and after that many copies were made for the people throughout the whole of Scotland. Now, this is when the name Covenanter was born. In November of that same year, the first free General Assembly for 36 years of the Church of Scotland was held in Glasgow Cathedral. Henderson was the moderator and Warriston was the clerk. Now, this assembly began a complete reformation of the church. It declared the Articles of Perth, the 5 Articles of Perth, the Book of Canons, the Book of Common Prayer, and even Episcopalianism itself to be unlawful. And despite intimidation and attempts by the King's Commissioner to dissolve it, the assembly continued in defiance of the King. However, the King, Charles I, was not going to accept this clear rejection of his authority easily, and he begins preparing for war with these Covenanters. And we're going to look at this, what happens next, in the next video. So that was the National Covenant of 1638, an expanded version of the National Covenant of 1581, but with 2 extra sections, the legal section and the practical application section of it by Alexander Henderson. and that's where the name Covenanter comes from. So thanks for watching, and we'll bring the next video to you again shortly, so thank you once again.